welcome to Wing and a Prayer Podcast, a show about Seattle Mariners baseball. I am your host, Andy Wing. Thank you to everyone that listened, downloaded, shared with your friends. The first two episodes have gotten over 150 downloads, and I just want to say a big thanks to you all. Now, you can find every episode on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and more. Please, for me, hit that download button, share with your friends. Let's get this over 250 downloads. Episode 3 coming at you right now. On today's show, we are going to spend time looking at the latest on the injury front. And then we're going to look at some MLB news with Shohei Ohtani. I'm sure you all are excited to hear what I have to say about that. And then we're going to look at some Mariner news, including the final 26-man roster and what that's going to look like. And then definitions. We're going to spend some time on some of the new age statistics that are being used and what I like about it and what it means to me. And then we're going to look at the competition. What is the AL West going to look like this year? And then I'll give you a sneak peek of future episodes, and then we'll end on Andy's rant. Can't wait to get going. Let's go. In terms of injuries this spring training, the Mariners have gotten pretty fortunate to have nothing really major happen. Yes, they've had a couple pitchers with some elbow or shoulder soreness, but no surgeries, nothing major's happened. But right before I went to record this episode, Brian Wu got listed on the injured list going into the season. Now, he had a bullpen session. Seemingly, he had some inflammation in his elbow. No structural damage, but they're shutting him down for 10 days just to be sure and want to make sure that he is healthy. But it is concerning that, man, right when the season starts, that happens. Now, what does that mean? It means Emerson Hancock, who was pitching well in spring training and really wanted a shot, well, he'll get his shot. He's going to start the season on the 5-man rotation to take his place. But hopefully it's not for very long, but luckily we got some depth. The latest from Matt Brash is that he's continuing to ramp up his intensity, getting ready to pitch in simulated games, and they think he'll be back by mid-April, which is pretty similar to what was last time we spoke. But everything's progressing well, no setbacks right now, so really no change, just hoping back sometime mid-April. Gregory Santos does not have as positive of news as Matt Brash does, as he was recovering from his shoulder soreness and then had a lat issue in one of his bullpens and got shut down on March 11th. He has not been throwing since then, but they did say he's feeling much better, and they're going to give him another MRI on March 28th to see if the inflammation has subsided. So hopefully after that, they can get him in a throwing program and get him back on the road, but it's really more weeks than days on his total recovery time. On the position player front, no major concerns, but Sam Haggerty will start the season on the IL due to a non-baseball related medical issue that's really undisclosed. He hasn't played since March 16th. We're hoping that he makes a quick recovery, but not really sure what to say other than that. Now, after hearing that, what do you think the most concerning thing is for this upcoming season? If you're not thinking pitching, then you're not thinking along with me. Pitching. Health of our pitching staff is the absolute most vital part of, I think, the success of this season. And we're already seeing some fragility with that. We're hoping that it's extremely minor and all these pitchers can come back and have positive impacts on the team. But as we have seen already, with Wu going down, that means Hancock's got to step up. With Santos and Brash not able to go right away, other guys got to step up. Now the team has shown the ability to develop guys and get them ready, and we're just hoping that continues until those guys are back up and running. Moving on to some MLB news, and there is no bigger news in the Major League Baseball world than Shohei Ohtani, the gambler. Haha, no, I'm only kidding. But in case you didn't know, news broke this past week that an investigative reporter, Tisha Thompson for ESPN, wrote an article where she discovered that wire transfers from Shohei Ohtani's bank account were going to an illegal California bookmaker for 500,000 installments, totaling up to $4.5 million. And part of her investigation, she was actually able to interview Ippei Mizuhara, Shohei Ohtani's interpreter. And Mizuhara basically said that money is to repay some debts that he had made gambling, and he got way in over his head. And the story initially was that he asked Ohtani came to him, basically said, hey, I gotten over my head. I'm in trouble, and asked him to bail him out. And so Ohtani reluctantly agreed by wiring the payments and just said, where do I send them to? And sent the wires. Well, what they all didn't know was that bookmaker was being investigated by federal authorities because it's an illegal practice in the state of California to do sports gambling. And so he was doing an underground service, and so he was being investigated. So through that investigation, these wire transfers were discovered, and that's where this all came about. So Tisha Thompson interviews Mizuhara, says basically Ohtani knew about it, but he bailed me out. And it's like, okay, that seems strange, and there probably needs to be more to it. And then like a day later, Ohtani's people around him basically come out and say, Ohtani knew nothing about this, and massive theft has happened. And that's all that was put out there. And then Mizuhara was fired that day from the Dodgers. And mind you, they're all in South Korea playing the opening sale series. And so they're not in the United States. It's not easy access. And all this is going down while those first two games are happening. And this is just wild. Like, what is going on? What's the truth? And then when Ohtani's team recants the story and says that's not true, it's theft, Tisha Thompson actually gets Ippei back on the line for a phone call and said, did you lie to me yesterday? And Ippei just says, yes, I did. None of it's true. It's all my fault. Shohei Ohtani knew nothing. And so obviously wild speculation comes out of that. And if you're willing to lie the first time, are you telling the truth now? And are you just covering for Ohtani? Is he the gambler and you're taking the fall? What's going on? And by now you've heard that Shohei Ohtani has come out and said that publicly that he didn't know about it, and this major fraud and theft has gone under his nose and didn't realize it, and basically he was stolen from. And there's two ways we can look at this. Either Ohtani knew about it all along, and he's either involved by gambling or bailing out a buddy. And then once he realized his name was associated with an illegal gambling scheme, they pivot quickly to blame it on the interpreter and say he knew nothing of it, because even if he's not gambling, it's not good to have your name and payments going to an illegal bookie where you can get in big trouble, because MLB rules state that basically you can't bet on baseball and you can't bet with an illegal bookie. So if your name's associated with it, where your name's right on the wire, then you got to pivot quickly and blame it on somebody else. Or the other way to look at this is maybe Shohei is telling the truth and he was just taken advantage of. And honestly, it's not all too uncommon for professional athletes to get taken advantage of by other people. They're solely focused on their craft, their sport, a lot of other engagements they have to be at. A lot of times they hand over their finances to other people, and many other athletes have handed their finances over to somebody else or gave other people access, and then that person takes advantage of them and steals from them. So it's not wildly unreasonable to think that Ippei stole from him, and there's many records that show and accounts that show how close he and Shohei Ohtani were and how much they spent time together, and it's more than just a business partnership. And a lot of times those are the relationships that unfortunately get taken advantage of, the people that you feel like are really close and that would never hurt you. And so I could see where that could get under Ohtani's nose. Now, if that's true, then it's probably a wake-up call for Ohtani that he needs to be more in charge of his finances, because the fact he was that lackadaisical with somebody else having access to his account to be able to make wires on his behalf is something he should never do again, and he probably won't do again with the amount of backlash and everything that's come out of this. Now, it's not over yet. There's an investigation ensuing. They're going to be looking into this from the feds to MLB and making sure everything that's being said is true. And if it's not, that'll come out. But it'll be interesting to see. My personal views, I tend to think he is just naive, focused on baseball, let Ippei have too much access to his funds, and Ippei took advantage of the situation and felt like maybe it's better to go get in trouble for some fraud than not pay off gambling debts with an illegal bookmaker. Anyway, I just think that Shohei is just naive and a little bit loose with his finances, and he's going to learn a lot from the situation. But time will tell. I'm sure the MLB will just sweep this right under the rug so that he can go on being a superstar for the Dodgers. And But the question I want to ask is, how are the Dodgers going to handle this? Is it going to be a distraction? Is it going to be a problem? How's Shohei going to handle it? Is he just not going to talk about it? Are they going to keep, because there's an investigation, they can't talk about it at all? That's what I'm curious about. How is it going to play out this season? How is it going to affect him and the team? Because I'm sure they were not wanting this kind of distraction going right into the season, this first season with the Dodgers. Mariner news with the final 26-man roster. Most of the spots coming in the spring were pretty well locked up. Really, barring injury, there weren't many opportunities. But with the injury to Brian Wu, Emerson Hancock will get brought up and be the fifth starter. So that'll round out the pitching staff. The relievers mostly set in stone. A lot of the same old faces that we have with Andres Munoz. But guys like Matt Brash, Gregory Santos are injured right now, and so they're going to start the year on the IL. So they brought Ryan Stanek in. So you still got Taylor Saucedo, Gabe Spire, Trent Thornton, and Austin Voth. So their bullpen will still be pretty solid. Most of those guys we already knew. Their names were in the mix last year. At catcher, Cal Raleigh. So Sebi Zavala is going to be the backup, with Mitch being mostly DH. And then in the outfield, the one open spot I thought might have a chance was Taylor Trammell. He had a really good spring, but the team just didn't feel like he's going to be able to make the cut, and he was out of options, so he's most likely going to get released by tomorrow or traded. And then, so your bench is really going to be Dylan Moore, Luke Raley, Luis Urias, Sebi Zavala. Those guys are really going to be backing it up and then getting their playing time when they can. And I think while Haggerty's on the IL, they'll probably just bring in another pitcher or somebody else, maybe Cade Marlowe up from the minor leagues to fill that spot. Again, I really like the depth of this team. I think it's really going to serve them well and give them a lot more depth than they had last year and allow them carry through injuries and other things that happen. I think we're going to see that even to the start of the season. So that's what I think about 26-man. Excited for the season to get going tomorrow. Let's go. Next up, I thought it'd be kind of fun to spend some time going over some newer sabermetric numbers that the game is really focused around these days, and talk through what they mean and why they're important to me. Hopefully we can all learn just a little bit from this. So if any of you are like me, I'm 38 years old, and I grew up looking at the back of baseball cards, reading those things up and down, memorizing every stat I possibly could. And the stats we grew up focusing on, if you're my age, was average, home runs, and RBIs. Those are the big three, right? You could look at hits and walks and doubles, obviously, but average, home run, RBI, that's what you'd focus on, right? 'Cause that's how productive you were as a hitter. That's how you were judged, how you recorded, how all-star games, MVPs, all the above. Ken Griffey Jr. in 1997, 56 home runs, 148 RBI. Like, those kind of numbers were just cemented in my brain. And now in this modern era, these new numbers, these sabermetric numbers have come out, and they're starting to be used more and talked about more. And maybe at times you've thought to yourself, what does the weird acronym mean, and why is it important? Can we just stick to the basics, darn it? But really, when you dig into it and spend some time to learn and understand what they mean, I think they make a lot of sense. So I'm going to go through a few that I really like and what they mean to me. And, maybe we can learn a little bit and understand the game a little bit better. So the first one I really love to look at is OPS. And OPS is just simply on base plus slugging. So you take the on base percentage of a hitter and you added the slugging percentage of a hitter. And to me, it's simple as how often do you hit the ball hard and how often do you get on base? So if you're somebody that slugs a high percentage, that means you're getting doubles, home runs, and a few triples. You're not just getting singles. And then you're somebody that also takes their walks and gets on base. So if you have a good on-base percentage and slugging, you have a good OPS. The defining line of what a good OPS is changing a little bit in this current era of Major League Baseball because offensive numbers are really getting worse. But to me, anybody north of 800 OPS is a good hitter, all-star level hitter pretty much. The league average in 2023, though, was 734. So anytime you're above that number, you're above average. But to me, 800 is kind of that dividing line. And the best players are up 800s, higher 800s, 900s, and the elite MVP type players are closer to 1,000. I want to break down an example of two extremes that I find very fascinating. So when you think of high OPS hitter, you probably think somebody like Yordan Alvarez, maybe even Julio, who hits a lot of home runs. But I got two extreme examples for you. First one, J.P. Crawford in 2023 versus Kyle Schwarber. Kyle Schwarber hit 47 home runs and knocked in 104 RBI. J.P. Crawford hit 19 home runs and knocked in 65 RBI. Who do you think had the higher OPS? Well, it was actually J.P. by 1 point. J.P. Crawford had an 818 OPS and Kyle Schwarber had an 817 OPS. Well, Andy, how can that be if Schwarber hit 47 home runs and knocked in over 100 runs, and his OPS is lower or the same as J.P. Crawford's? Well, that's kind of where home run and RBI don't actually show you the whole picture. See, Schwarber had only a 197 average. He's a boomer bust guy, home run or walk or strikeout. Where JP had a 266 average. Right away, JP has 69 more points of batting average to work with. And then J.P. Crawford had a 380 on-base percentage. Schwarber had more walks, but because his batting average was so low, his on-base percentage was actually a little bit lower than J.P.'s. Now, Schwarber's slugging percentage was higher, but honestly not by much. Schwarber had 47 home runs, but he only had like 18 doubles, where J.P. had like 35 doubles with 19 home runs, so his total bases actually rose up pretty high, and his slugging percentage wasn't much lower. So overall, his OPS was slightly higher than Schwarber's, even though Schwarber seemingly, look at the back of a baseball card, his production was high. But how you influence the game, hitting the ball hard, getting on base, moving runners along, keeping the ball in play, JP did a better job than Schwarber, and he didn't need to hit 40 home runs to have a better OPS. And to me, that's why it's important. It shows the value of somebody like J.P. Crawford that doesn't hit 40 home runs, but he had 19, he had 35 doubles, on base, getting his walks, very valuable player. And that's why I think OPS is extremely important. Really, to help us understand who hits the ball hard, we need to understand what a hard hit means. And any ball that has an exit velocity of 95 plus miles an hour is considered a hard hit Major League Baseball. And any ball that's at that exit velocity off the bat or higher typically means it's going to be a hit, or at least a greater chance of being a hit. Because the harder you hit the ball, the less reaction time the fielders have, and the more likely it is to hit the ground and get through the infield or to the fence or any of those things, or even be a home run. So as we look at these statistics, some of these other little factors play into it. And so we use this to kind of judge and gauge a player's performance. And sometimes you can have a guy that's hitting the ball really hard, but he's getting out because he's just hitting it right at people. And typically those numbers normalize over time. Another statistic measurement that's being used more, that I've learned more and more about it, but I do like it, is WRC+. You probably have heard it. You may have heard it talked about, but maybe don't understand what it is. And for a long time, I didn't really understand what it was. But basically, WRC+ is runs created that looks at basically how many runs a player creates based on all the factors. But then it takes into account also for their park they play in, the era of baseball they played in. And so the overall statistic basically says the average player creates, on average, score is a 100 based on their on-base percentage, their slugging, their hard hit rate, all of that combined together. And the average player gets a 100 score. So if you're a really great hitter, all-star capable hitter, you're probably going to be closer to a 120, 125. And if you're a 125, that means you're 25% greater than the average player. And a 150 is 50% greater. And so same goes below 100. If you're a 75 or an 80, that means you're 20% below the average player. So an example of that, Ronald Acuna Jr. in 2023 had a 170 WRC+. And it's no wonder he was the league MVP in 2023. So you might be asking yourself, well, what was Julio's? Because he was fourth in MVP, had a good year, had a really great year, but not like MVP level. Well, he was a 126, so he was 26% greater than the average player, which makes sense. I think way that season played out, he's a top-of-the-line player. He was top 10 in WRC+ for the season. So as you watch this year and you hear more about these statistics, you may hear it on TV. this player has this WRC plus. Just think about this. Average is 100. If they're above that, that means they're doing pretty good. If they're below it or at it, they're not doing that great. When this episode is published, the Mariners will be just 1 day away from opening day. And we've spent a lot of time looking at the Mariners, getting you ready for this season. But I think we should spend some time looking at our competition to see what are the Mariners up against this year. Now, in 2023, the AL West was one of the more competitive divisions, with 3 teams vying for the title all the way to the end of the season. The Houston Astros, the Texas Rangers, and the Seattle Mariners all finished within about a game of each other, and it took to the last day of the season in order to decide the division. The Astros ended up winning the division on the very last day of the season. Texas came in second, and the Mariners, as you know, were sadly eliminated. Now, the Astros come into this year still a contender, still with a top-of-the-notch lineup, but their pitching staff is going to be a little suspect, so we'll talk through that a little bit. So the Astros last year had a little bit of a roller coaster season, ups, downs, ended up winning the division. They ended up playing Texas in the ALCS, lost in 7 games. Thank goodness. I've never rooted for Texas so hard in my life, but the Astros lost, so amen. But the Astros come into this year, again, they got a stacked lineup with Bregman, Altuve, Alvarez, and Tucker, and as long as those guys stay healthy, they will be a dominant lineup. The problem is they have a couple guys, Bregman and Altuve, that are aging. They're getting a little older. They're getting in the later stages of their career, and health and wear take a higher toll on guys like that. So could they stay healthy and have great seasons? Of course they can. But the susceptibility to injury is much higher. And honestly, Yordan Alvarez has been susceptible to injury a little bit. And so health is going to be a big key. But their lineup should stay solid all year, even with some of the losses in their outfield, such as Michael Brantley. But their pitching staff, though, I mean, they got guys on their starting staff that are already injured. Like Verlander is starting the year on the IL with arm issues. They got other guys on the IL with arm issues. So their pitching staff already is hurting, and I think it's going to be tough for them to really start out hot from the pitching front. I feel like Houston's going to probably start off slow. They may pick it up late in the season, as they usually do. They'll probably be a contender right there at the end, vying for the division title. But I think they'll start off slow with some of their pitching staff issues. Their offense will carry them, but we'll just have to kind of keep a close eye on them to see how they do. But I think they'll start off slow and pick up steam later as they go. I really expect, everywhere I've read, and I believe, Astros are going to finish between 87 and 92 wins, vying for the division title. So they're going to be a force. They're going to be a force. They have their weaknesses, so does everybody, but they're going to be a force. The Los Angeles Angels. This team is the epitome of mediocrity. I saw a stat the other day online that showed all major league teams in the last 10 years, and they listed how many times each team has finished in last place in the last 10 or 15 years. And the Angels were one of very few teams that had 0 times in last place during that span. And that is just crazy to me. I feel like the Angels the last 10 years have been pretty awful. They've been contenders maybe short periods of time, then always falter. They've been well under 500, especially when you have Trout and Ohtani on your team. And that's it. They have just enough talent. They spend just enough money to be right in the middle of the pack, maybe even contend for a little while. But their pitching staff has always failed them. Their ability to stay on the field has affected them. And so year in and year out, they seem to just falter and falter. And they haven't made the playoffs since 2014. They haven't won a playoff game since 2009. There's no expectation they're going to get any better. Set all that aside, they just lost the greatest player in the nation right now in Major League Baseball with Shohei Ohtani too. They're really going to have to rely on some of their young talent that they've brought up through their system lately. Their catcher, Logan O'Hoppe, pay attention to him. He's a good hitter. He played really well last year, and they're really expecting him to step up. Their first baseman, Nolan Shanuel, he's a guy that they've drafted a couple years ago. They're really expecting to play well, so they're going to have to rely on some of their young talent as well. And their pitching staff is really interesting as they have 3 left-handed pitchers in their starting rotation, which is pretty rare. A lot of teams maybe have 1 at most, but they have 3. So they've got Reed Detmers, who's going to be a top of their rotation guy. He had a pretty disappointing year last year, so they're expecting a big bounce back. Sandoval's also in their rotation, expecting a bounce back year for him. They are banking on a lot of bounce back years for their starting staff. And their bullpen, they got a couple guys that throw gas in the upper 90s to 100, but not a lot of experience. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. But pitching has usually been the Angels' weakness. Their offense has usually been pretty good. So it's kind of seems par for the course here, what's going to happen here. So I think there's going to be mediocre again. They're probably going to be sub-mediocre, down below 80 wins this year. And so they're probably going to be pretty similar to what they did last year. It's 70 to 75 wins, the expectation, be in third place. Again, not finish last, because guess what? They have the Oakland A's in their division. So it's kind of hard to be in last when you got a boom or bust team like the Oakland A's. They either have a lot of young talent that puts it together and they can win a bunch of games, or they lose a ton of games. And right now, they're in lose a ton of games mode. So that's the benefit of the Angels. They don't finish in last. But when you're in the middle, man, that's just not good. Middle's terrible, because you're either not getting good draft capital, but you're also not winning playoff games. So Angels expect to be third place, 70-75 wins. Ohtani's gone. Trout's getting older. And Doan doesn't want to be there. It's going to be a tough year for the Angels. Oakland Athletics. The Oakland A's lost 112 games last year. They are the not-for-long Oakland Athletics, as they're going to be moving to Las Vegas here soon. But they don't really know where they're going to play in 2025. With all that uncertainty, it is hard to go out and play at your peak performance. Not only that, the A's have had a long history of developing talent and then shipping it off via trade or free agency, and then just relying on young players in time and time again. But when you have all this uncertainty, plus young players, plus a fan base that's not really supporting you, it is hard to go out and just win and rise above all of that. And we've seen that, losing 112 last year. The only recognizable name any of you would probably even know on the team is Abraham Toro. He's our second baseman. But outside of that, a lot of guys that are minor leaguers that have come up in the last couple of years that you've never really heard of before. One guy to pay attention to, though, is Shea Langeliers. He is our catcher, sometimes plays DH. That guy's got pop. I went to a couple games last year, and he took the Mariners' yard a couple times, and he had pretty good numbers. And he's going to be a guy that hits the ball hard, and keep your eye out for him when he comes to town, Shea Langeliers. Expectation for this team is still low, lose 100 games roughly. But you can never take the A's lightly, as they always come to play hard. Every time you think that you've just got them and they're going to be an easy team, they'll beat you. So major league teams are major league teams. These guys will come ready to play, and the Mariners better be ready when they play them. But their talent level is going to be pretty low. Lastly, the Texas Rangers, the World Series champion Texas Rangers, who lost the division on the last day of the season, losing to the Mariners, who had just been eliminated the day before, and yet rallied back to win the entire tournament, the World Series. A really incredible run, and it really shows that Rangers spent a lot of money in the last couple of years bringing in players like Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, Nathan Eovaldi, Jordan Montgomery, and they heavily invested in their roster to really put out a World Series contending team. And for them to win the World Series like that last year really validated a lot of their decisions. I mean, Corey Seager's contract is ridiculous, but to win the World Series in your second year, validated. Marcus Semien's contract, validated. Even if they have the end of that contract does not turn out very well, you got a World Series title out of it. Who cares? And so good for the Rangers, but hopefully this is a lesson learned a little bit for the Mariners. I know they haven't exactly spent money. We've talked about that in the prior episodes. But when you have talent, you got to invest in it. And they've done that with Julio, and hopefully they do that with some of the other homegrown talent to kind of match up with that. What's interesting about this upcoming season is they lost a lot of talent on the roster. So they lost starting pitcher Martin Perez, Jordan Montgomery, Jake Odorizzi, relief pitcher Aroldis Chapman, outfielder Robbie Grossman, catcher Mitch Garver to the Mariners, and catcher Austin Hedges. So they lost a lot of players. They have to fill those spots, come up with new. And they might have got a couple of players lately, but players gained really just two a starting pitcher and a relief pitcher. So they hadn't added a ton to their roster. They're relying on some prospects, honestly, to come up within the ranks. Evan Carter came on last year at the very end of the season as a rookie call-up, played really well in the playoffs, and so he's going to be the left fielder every day now, and he's a guy that they've brought up and expect high things from. So they got some young guys that they're going to be reliant on. Their starting staff's led again by Nathan Eovaldi, who had a great year, followed by John Gray, Dane Dunning, Andrew Heaney, and Cody Bradford. This is where I think they've taken a step back. They had with Jordan Montgomery last year was an ace for them, and they lost him, decided not to pursue him. And so their starting staff, I think, is going to take a step back. Texas's pitching has always been a little rough. Their offense just historically has always been strong. Offense has always been rough. And their bullpen got some good arms in it for sure that are coming back, but it's never been a strength, and I don't think it's going to be a super strength for them again. With all that said, though, this team is going to be a force to reckon with. That lineup with those players they still have is one of the top lineups, along with the Astros in the American League. They're going to have to overcome their pitching. And a lot of times they did, and they will, but their pitching is going to hold them back, but sometimes they're just going to outslug teams. The expectation is pretty similar to the Astros. They're going to win 90, 92 games maybe, and vie for the division title. All three teams are going to be right there at the top, I really feel. And it's going to be a slugfest right to the end, and it's going to be a dogfight. So every opportunity these teams play each other is a chance to win the division with head-to-head matchups. Putting a bow on this competition AL West recap look back, the Astros and Rangers are going to be tough. The Mariners are going to have to fight hard, play their best ball against them to beat them this year. They're going to have to pitch great. Offense is going to have to put it together to beat them. They're all going to fight it out. The Angels and Athletics are weak and seemingly getting weaker and are not going to put up much of a fight. So it's going to be those three teams battling it out. You all know what I think. I think the Mariners are going to pull this out and get first place. What do you all think? What do you think the season's going to end as? Are the Mariners going to finish first? Are they going to come in second or third? What do you think? Hit me up. Tell me what you think. Now it's time for Andy's rant. What is bugging the heck out of me? Well, I'll tell you what. Preseason rankings, position rankings, team rankings. It drives me nuts. All these analysts determining what teams are going to do what and where they're going to finish. I'll tell you what, you know who at team last year everybody said would win the World Series? The Padres. Guess what? They didn't even make the playoffs. So I just get tired of these preseason. It's just banter. I know it is. I know it's just people putting stuff out there to talk about, filler. With all the shows and content that's got to be put out there, they got to put something out there, and it's become for something people to argue about. But I just get so tired of it. It means nothing. The year the Mariners won 116 games, they were predicted to go be third place and win 82. And so the Diamondbacks last year were all predicted to be third and fourth place, and they made it to the World Series. I remember when Jesse Winker, when the Mariners traded for him, he was listed as the number one left fielder in the game, and he was one of the worst. It's just, you don't know. There's so many factors that go into the season. I get why they do it, but it annoys me. I pay no attention to it. And yet sometimes I still get bothered when like Cal Raleigh's number 10 on the catcher's list. I get bothered when another Mariner player is just not high up on the list like I think they should be. And I shouldn't let it bother me because I think it's stupid, but still, it just bothers me. All these preseason rankings, it doesn't mean anything. Let's play the games. Let's see where it plays out. I get predictions and trying to figure out where things are, and I don't mind predicting overall records. And honestly, the team predictions bother me less. It's really more the player predictions, like how many home runs they're going to hit, how many doubles. It's like, well, do you really predict anyone's going to hit like 55 when they bust out and have a huge season? No, you don't. It's so hard to know. I mean, Ronald Acuña's last year, there's no way that anybody would predict what he did last year, and yet he did. He had an amazing year, 170 WRC plus, just like the stats we were talking about earlier. Ridiculous season. That's why he was MVP. But what trying to predict Matt Olson's season, he hit 54 home runs and 139 RBIs last year and could have been MVP himself. And so like, well, he's going to hit 38 home runs and he's going to knock in 105 RBIs and hit 266. Like, okay, I get statistical probabilities and everything, but just like leave it alone. Just he's going to have a good year. We expect high things from him, but like, I don't know. I just get tired of that. It's hard to take injuries into account. And let's just play the games. Like, let's get all this filler out of here and let's just go play. And lastly, I want to give you a quick preview of my next episode. I'm going to be at T-Mobile Park for opening day tomorrow night. And many of you have probably been to a Mariner game. You've been to end of season, but maybe you've never been to opening day. And I'm going to document it. I'm going to share my thoughts and kind of tell you why it's important, why the amazing spectacle that it is, and why maybe you should next year consider going if you haven't gone, taking your family and going. It's an amazing event. I've been a couple times, and I'm so excited to be out there tomorrow. I can't wait to be at the stadium cheering on the Mariners. I can't wait to tell you all about it, too. Now that the season starts tomorrow, I'm hoping to have episodes out every week, maybe even 2 weeks, depending on my schedule. But I'm hoping to get some game updates, season storylines, and just share some experiences I have as well along the way. I'm really excited to get this season going, and let's go Mariners. Thank you so much for listening along to the show today. As a reminder, we're on Apple Podcast, Amazon, Spotify, and many more. Hit that download button for me. Share it with your friends. Let's get this well over 200 downloads. Thank you, and go Mariners.